What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Mikey McNuggets, Earl the Pearl, G. Bush coming at you on this Bleacher Report Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show crossover. Guys, we had our 2-minute reaction show yesterday, and what we saw in the field against the Bengals was pretty disgusting. Not a ton to dissect from that. So we're going to go back and kind of talk about the decisions the Browns have in front of them after what Myles Garrett said on Friday, basically giving the organization an ultimatum. Win or trade me. I want to be not anywhere around a rebuild in Cleveland. And then he doubled down on that with some comments after the Bengals loss, saying people don't remember Lawrence Taylor for his sacks. They remember him for his winning. I want to be part of a winning franchise. And at the moment, the Cleveland Browns are the opposite of that, sitting at 3-12 on the season. Let's start with Myles in particular. Earl, I want to start with you. But if the Browns are facing a decision this year, show Myles Garrett a plan towards contention in 2025, or trade Myles Garrett for, let's just say, hypothetically, 2 first-round picks. Is there a plan they could show Myles that will satisfy his thirst of being a contender next season?
Not realistically, not at say a time, in my opinion. I think when you look at the overall situation, there's a lot of unanswered questions when it comes to Andrew Berry. There's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to Kevin Stefanski and a lot of the coaches on his staff. When you look at the roster is not as talented as we thought it was. A lot of the positions that we thought were strong suits, a lot of those dudes is getting older. And guys like Batonio or Wyatt Teller can be cap casualties this coming off season. When you look at the defensive side of the ball, you don't know the long-term health status of Jock. And so that raises another question of what do you do to address the linebacker situation? There's still no prominent pass rusher opposite of Myles Garrett. Now it looks like that, a defensive tackle Michael Jr. might be a baller in a long suit. You look at the entire secondary, I think it's fair to say that everybody not named Denzel Ward took a step in the wrong direction this year. And so, how will those guys bounce back next year is yet to be seen. And so when you look at the things that go on the field, when you look at the front office, and the biggest elephant in the room is the quarterback position, it's hard to sell Myles Garrett on any plan that says the Browns are going to be real players in 2025. And so when you look at that, you're faced with a tough decision. If you're Myles Garrett, 1, and then 2, if you're the Cleveland Browns. If Myles ultimately says, you know what, I can't sign up for any of this next year, and then you're gonna have to respect the man's wishes and trade him. Make sure you get a couple first-round picks back in return. But if that's not the case, then you're gonna have to find something to appease him. And if you can't fix everything in one swoop, maybe you can appease him with a new GM or a new head coach with some fresh ideas. Who knows?
G, what say you?
I think the only way at this point is if you tell Myles Garrett, hey, pick your head coach. You like who you like, you almost got to do the Donovan Mitchell. Let's be clear. They need to talk, if you want to take a look at one organization that did it the right way, and one organization that's getting the dividends paid to them is the Cleveland Cavaliers. We were on J.B. Baker's staff, and let's be clear, they had an even more difficult decision because they had won 50 games. They had won playoff games. They had created this thing. They got Donovan Mitchell. They drafted Evan Mobley and Darius Garland, and they put a roster together. They got 51 wins, 50-plus wins, multiple years in the playoff wins. So what kind of heart do you have to pull that trigger compared to being 3-12, or they'll probably win 3 games this year, and you're waffling over whether or not you want to get rid of Barry and Stefanski. Listen, as constituted, this whole thing is shot. They need a whole new quarterback room. Earl brought up JOK. We don't know what's going on with JOK. We don't know if he's going to ever come back and play. And I'm not just going to sit here and say it like I'm getting some new. I understand what it is to have neck injuries. So, we saw what happened with Greedy Williams. When you're dealing with nerves, it's a whole situation. So, the team is older. The team is flawed. The team needs multiple positions. It's just not the quarterback. Even if they could get a quarterback in here that was a veteran, that would be Kirk Cousins or Sam Darnold or something like that. You still need you need a left tackle. You need to figure out what you're doing at running back, another receiver. The corners have regressed. Linebackers, I don't even have they nothing even talk with the linebackers, and your special teams are not good. So for me, there's not very much they can probably do to sell Myles Garrett on it. The only thing I think that they can do is come to him and say, look, we screwed it up. The one thing we're going to guarantee is we're not going to have Deshaun Watson at quarterback, because he seems to be stuck on the fact that he's laughing at this quarterback room. The quarterback on this team has to be somewhere else next year, or them getting another dude and telling him, hey, let's sit in with some general managers and see what your thought process is on their plan. But as constituted, no.
Myles Garrett is incredible. And on the football field, there are very few guys in the history of the sport that can compare to what 95 does. This season, he's on pace to lead the NFL in pressures again. He's on pace to lead the NFL in pass rush win rate. He's on pace to lead the NFL in double teams faced. He is unquestionably the best defensive player in football. And do you know what the best defensive player in football on your roster does if you have no quarterback? It goes 3-12. So, yeah, I understand if I'm Myles Garrett why I'm beyond frustrated at the current situation of the Cleveland Browns. And I made a giant mistake today, guys. I read the comments before we got on this stream from our segment in UCSS about the Myles Garrett conundrum. And people were big mad that any of us suggested the possibility of trading Myles for the betterment of the long run, because it makes sense. Don't trade a generational player. Well, I think we saw this year what having a generational player and nothing around him leads to. And it leads to a bad record in football. It leads to a top draft pick. And that is not what Myles Garrett wants to be a part of. We're not saying this just because we think it's in the Browns' best interest to trade Myles Garrett. He said it, not us. We can play you the 3-minute soundbite, but we only got 25 minutes on Bleacher Report, so we're going to save you the time. But you can go back and listen. The bite starts at 8 minutes and 4 seconds of his press conference from Friday. It is on YouTube for free, $0, 0 cents. Go listen to it yourself. The reality is, though, guys, and this is why it's such a big decision for the Browns, if you decide to trade Myles Garrett, if they decide to go that route, do you trust Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski to be in charge of the rebuild? I'm going to give you guys all the questions, and we can answer them individually. Do you trust the guys in charge currently to be in charge of a rebuild?
No.
We'll get to them. Let me just run through the gauntlet of questions.
Okay.
Do you trust this roster to be turned around in a year or two? Or do you have to tear it all the way down? Is ownership in this instance even looking at next year, or are their eyes on 2029 when a new dome opens? The entire Myles Garrett ultimatum and what they do this summer with Myles Garrett is a microcosm of how this entire franchise is set to operate over the next half decade. And it is going to be fascinating the direction that Jimmy Haslam and his group decide to go.
I look at it like this, and what I want to just really drill down on is, there is, in the first round, when it comes to drafting Hall of Famers, you might get one guy out of 10 that are going to be a Hall of Famer. You might get out of those 10 guys, one of those or half of those guys might be considered one of the best to ever play at their position. The Cleveland Browns have both. You have a guy who is a generational player and might be considered, when it's all said and done, with the best player to ever put on a jersey at his position. And what I don't want to do is, I don't want to minimize this, because I'm 43 years old, and I'm not as old as some of these other people. But from me watching the Cleveland Browns, he's the best defensive player, hands down. It's not even close. You could combine all the other guys. It's not even close. You got something that was finite. You got something that was concrete. You got somebody that is the best at what they do. For us to even be thinking and considering trading him for picks, which we've squandered, and think about it. 2 number 1 picks. Well, let's say this staff drafts Cam Irving and Danny Shelton. Those were first-round picks. Cam Irving and Danny Shelton were in 13 and 12 and 13 or 12 and 15, somewhere around there. Those were 2 mid-round, first-round picks. You're not going to get top-flight first-round picks for Myles Garrett, because he's going to want to play for a contender.
Yeah.
So you're going to be trading him to teams that are very good. And when he gets on the team, they're going to be damn good. So you're going to be getting picks 25, 26, 29. You're not going to be drafted in the top 3. So all these, the pipe dreams of we're going to get Arch Manning and X, Y, and Z, stop. That's not even, and that's even considering if the Browns even lose that much to have their pick be in the top 5. Anytime I hear this, I've heard people saying, let's tank for Andrew Luck. Let's tank for RG3. Let's tank for said quarterback. Listen, Arch Manning got a nice name. He ain't won no games yet. I have a problem trading a Hall of Famer for an idea of a quarterback who has not even started yet. So these are the problems when you start talking about this, because it sounds crazy to think that you're going to get another player that is even equal to Myles Garrett.
Yeah, I think for me, I'll preface my comments with this at first. The only way I'm trading Myles Garrett is if Myles Garrett tells me he no longer wants to play here. I'm not going to willingly just part ways with the best player on my team because the situation is as bad as it is, regardless of what the return on investment can be. I think that people got to understand the emotional tie and the relationships that Myles Garrett has built in the city. And the Browns fan base are already in a position to where apathy is starting to set in, basically meaning, how much of a damn do we still give, right? And you look at the situation with Nick Chubb, for example, a guy that was beloved fan favorite that probably won't play another down in the city of Cleveland. That's yet to be determined, but you've already lost him. And that's an emotional tie that we're going to have to deal with. And you're going to tell this fan base that you're going to willingly part ways with Myles Garrett. I just don't think that's something that's going to sit well with anybody, regardless of what your long-term plans is. Now, if Myles comes to you and says, yeah, trade me, then you need to respect the man's wishes based on everything that he has done for your organization and get him up out of here to wherever it is that he wants to go. Will it warrant a top 10, top 15 pick? Probably not. But you'll still get a first round pick, and whoever has those picks at their disposal, they can make a decision on, can they identify talent in the late first round, or are they going to package those picks to try to move up in the first round in another year, etc. So it's more than one way to skin the cat. But regardless of it, if Myles Garrett ends up traded, I don't think this regime should be responsible for making the trade or using those draft picks to get other assets on this football team.
If you're going through a complete rebuild, and that's what a decision to trade Myles Garrett would trigger, you clean house top to bottom, every front office person, every coach on the staff, every player who's not on a rookie deal, bye-bye. You have to start from rock bottom, and if you're going to go through that process, it makes no sense to allow the coaching staff that got you to said process to be the ones to try and drag you out of it. And that's why I said this is a franchise-altering decision that all starts with Myles Garrett. If they decide to go that route and they feel that's in the best interest of their franchise, I just can't fathom a world, and I think it would be frankly stupid, to allow the people who got you in that position to now try and get you out. That's where you put the head off the snake, and you got to start fresh. It may not be an upgrade. It may be a worse decision. Whoever you hire to replace Barry and Stefanski may not actually be better, but they deserve a chance as opposed to letting the same guys who got you here run it back.
It's like saying, it's like being the leader of a corporation and you the CEO. The CEO has to file for Chapter 11. And then you're like, well, we're going to give him a bonus and bring him back after you file for bankruptcy. No, you just said your business model was garbage. You guys lost money. You had to file for bankruptcy, but you're running it back with the people that helped you get to bankruptcy. It don't make no sense. And the optics look crazy, because what it will end up looking like, even though it won't be this, it'll look like you chose Suits over a Hall of Famer. Mm-hmm. You remember how we looked at Reinsdorf in Chicago when they broke up the Bulls? And we were like, how can you break up the Bulls and they won 12 in a row? It just looks like you chose, I want to do it my way. We're going to tear it down again. And you're like, but you got rid of Myles Garrett and now you get picks and you're going to sit here and preach to us patience, or you're playing again. And we're like, I don't want to look at you guys. I don't want to look at no plan. I just want, if we're going to lose Myles Garrett, there needs to be collateral damage where nobody comes back from that.
I think in this heart of hearts Cleveland is where Myles Garrett wants to be. I think if it was up to him and all things was equal, he will retire a member of the Cleveland Browns. But I think there's also a real reason that he decided to go public with these comments. You know, you're putting a team that you love and really want to play for on a hot seat, and you're putting them on public notice. And it's basically saying like, hey, man, I'm getting fed up. And maybe if I go about this publicly, y'all can hear my cries, right? I want to be a part of a consistent winning organization, you know, and for him to go about it the way that he did, hopefully Jimmy and D Haslam can hear him loud and clear, and they make whatever changes is necessary. It's a whole lot different, and it hits a whole lot harder when your most productive player over the last 25, 26 years of your franchise speaks out as loudly as he did.
When your best player talks, you have to listen, or you're going to lose your best player, not just from a physical standpoint in terms of maybe you trade him, but from an emotional and locked in standpoint. And Myles wears a C on his chest. He's one of the captains of this team. He's one of the leaders of the franchise. And when he says, show me a plan to win or I don't want to be here, I mean, does anyone blame Myles for saying what he did? I have no issue whatsoever with his comments. If I was in year 8, if I was on a Hall of Fame trajectory, if I'm now the first player in NFL history to record 100 sacks before the age of 29, yeah, I'd want to have some playoff wins to show for it. And I thought the fact he doubled down on those comments following the Bengals game with the Lawrence Taylor comparison were pretty telling, because through the first 7.8 years of his career, G, you know him better than I do, Myles has never had that tone and never said those words. It was always, I'm in Cleveland forever. This is the first time he's ever indicated even a slight willingness to imagine himself in another team's uniform. And if he's reached that point, and I guess this is my big picture with all of this, if he's reached that point, to me, that signals that A, he doesn't necessarily believe in the vision that Barry and Stefanski pitched him on to start the season. 2, he's lost faith in the quarterback room, and you can take, I know he didn't say Deshaun by name on Friday. He said it wasn't necessarily Deshaun he was talking about on Sunday. Whatever. This is part of the fallout from the Deshaun Watson trade. They don't have as much talent as they should have because they lost the picks. Deshaun hasn't been the player, yada, yada, yada. I don't blame him. I'd want to win too. And frankly, they haven't done enough winning throughout his tenure here. Myles has done almost everything he possibly could to put them in a position to succeed. The guys around him, the franchise around him, the coaching staff around him, they haven't lived up to their end of the bill in this equation.
Well, I mean, it clearly signals more to just a bad season, right? I think everything that you're pointing to is signaling to, okay, internally, maybe it's been bad culture, right? And maybe Myles has looked around because, you know, if you go back to some of his comments, he says, we need to get better, and not just on the field, but upstairs in the front office as well. When you talk about just, you know, looking at the quarterback room and growing sour there, just the entirety of the offense. One of the things he says so sarcastically that, you know, made a lot of sense. He says, you know, sometimes the defense just got to step up, because if the offense is only capable of putting up 17 points, that means we got to hold our opponents to 14. Newsflash, the Cleveland Browns have scored a combined 13 points in the last 2 games, right? And so, like, to your point, like the issues is plentiful and they are everywhere. And, you know, it's signaling to a lot of things, more than just the Browns having one of the worst seasons since they went, 0-16. So,
yeah, listen, I'm not source guy, but I heard from somebody very close to Myles Garrett, and the quote was, we're not trying to have him be Joe Thomas. This was a year ago. And, you know, Myles did a very good job of he went under the radar, put his head down, put his nose down, and played football. I think the Defensive Player of the Year award kind of pacified some of the stuff. He felt like you were on the right track. And let's not forget, this was supposed to be a Super Bowl window for the Cleveland Browns. Mm-hmm. This 5 years was a Super Bowl window for the Browns, and they spent 3 of those years with under 500 records, losing records in that 5-year window. Look, I've said this all along. Good teams, good coaches, and good general managers would pivot, and they would say, listen, Kevin Stefanski has not been forceful enough about what he needs to be about it. Is listen, guys, the shine is down. We need to win football games. We shouldn't be at the point where we're talking about we got to see what we got in DTR. That like to to a championship contender team, like you got to think about it. When you see a Zadarius Smith walk off to another team, an Amari Cooper walk off to another team, JOK get injured for the whole year, nothing coming back. You're looking at guys that are in your locker room talking about, well, it's a business decision. That type of rhetoric and that type of energy tells you that the people at top are not serious. There is nothing wrong with getting in front of a camera and saying this aloud. I don't know who we are, but listen, we are not having no losing season, and people better grab onto this rope because I'm watching all film work. But it didn't seem that the energy ain't been there, that effort, that passion ain't been there. And now you sitting here trying to tell a dude, what did you learn from the 1-31? What did you learn? Jimmy Haslam, you were ahead of this organization when that happened. If you're 1-31 and you lose Joe Thomas, and Joe Thomas retires without one playoff victory, what did you learn? So when Myles Garrett sits in front of you and say, okay, Joe Thomas was a Hall of Famer, what did you do right by him? Nothing. You clapped it up. You gave him his Ring of Honor thing. He got his little gold jacket, and that was it.
So you mentioned Joe Thomas. He was on Ken and Lima here in Cleveland this morning, and he was asked about Myles Garrett's comments, and I want to read you his quote. You should listen to it as well because his inflection and tone is important here, but I want to read you his quote when they asked him about Myles's comments and his desire to win. Joe Thomas told Ken and Lima on The Fan this morning, quote, I can totally understand that Myles has maybe some different considerations about his career that an offensive lineman just wouldn't have, end quote. I take that as this. When we look at players and the greatest of all time and their legacies, for quarterbacks, it's certainly about Super Bowls, right? For certain positions, your legacy is tied to winning more than others. Did Jonathan Ogden win a Super Bowl?
No. Yeah, actually, he did. Sorry about that.
But that's my point. You don't remember the greatest left tackles because they won Super Bowls or not, right?
No, you just know because they were great, right? Like the Orlando Paces, the Munozes, the Basellis.
Defensive ends are one of those positions where I do think the trophy count on your resume makes a difference. And Myles, who's on a trajectory to be right up there with the greatest of all time at the position, doesn't have that other part of the resume that's going to keep him out of the Mount Rushmore conversations.
Think about this. One of his idols, one of the guys that, he has spent a lot of time with over his career has been Bruce Smith.
Yep.
Bruce Smith is a legendary pass rusher who ended his Hall of Fame career without a Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And so you wonder, when you have those type of conversations with your mentor and these things come up, what type of advisement are you getting from another Hall of Famer who's played that same position? So
it's a great point, Earl.
Bruce Smith at one point had the sack record, I do believe. Bruce Smith was for the Buffalo Bills. He kept playing, continued to play for the Washington Redskins, Washington Commanders, Washington football team, whatever you want to call them. But when you talk about the defensive ends that are known for, you think of Deacon Jones because he came up with the word quarterback sack. You think of Michael Strahan because he has the record of most sacks in the season. And you think of the top two. You think of Reggie White and Lawrence Taylor. Reggie White went to the Packers and cemented his legacy by getting that Super Bowl. And you look at Lawrence Taylor, LT, getting that Super Bowl, being one of the first those are 1 and 2. Yeah. And then we look at them because of the totality of the package. And he is correct. Joe Thomas dropping dimes. Offensive lineman, you just know for what you can do and how great you are in your skill set. But when it comes to pass rushers, that's a marquee position, and you are judged based on all of those different accolades as well.
And last thing, and we'll wrap here.
Real quick, because I know we got to get up out of here. I just want to highlight this comment real quick. Bruce did go to 4 in a row. He did. And I think that further illustrates my point. At least Bruce had the opportunity to compete for 4 Super Bowls, even though he didn't win one. And Myles haven't even been in a position to compete for 1, let alone 4.
And those memories from big time games, the playoff moments, you cannot replicate in the regular season. And you can go back and think of all the best players, take offensive linemen out of the equation. A lot of times your first memory of that player is something they did in the playoffs, when it's a standalone nationally televised game, when the stakes are higher than ever, and you can pinpoint. You go back to Strahan, G. He walked off on the sunset. He beat the perfect undefeated Patriots. The defensive line in that game was dominant. You remember those little things from Michael Strahan. Myles wants those opportunities. He has not been privy to enough of them in Cleveland through the first 8 games of his career. And I can totally understand, and I hold nothing against him for at the end of a 3-12 season right now, with 2 games to go, he has met his wit's end. We appreciate everyone for tuning into this Bleacher Report Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show combo. You can catch us tomorrow at 11 a.m. on UCSS on YouTube. For G. Bush, for Earl the Pro, I'm Mikey McNuggets. We'll see you later. Peace.